Hello boys and girls, good to see you. We'll talk about the castling now. So we've dealt with a couple of endings. We'll deepen as we progress with our lessons, the openings, the middle game, the endings. But now let's just tackle the castling. Okay, castle is a noun, in chess is a verb, and it means an action, a very exceptional special move that you can play it once per game. It can't be undone, it can't be uncastled, and it refers to two pieces, the king and the rook. Now let's have a look at our position here. The game hasn't even started. We'll get there if we play all the pieces in between the king and the rook. Alright, so I'm just gonna give a random example here. Okay, let's suppose I'm gonna go with bishop c4. I know they're gonna play knight c6, I'm gonna play knight f3. Just a couple of examples, bishop e7. Now, white has no pieces in between the king and the rook. Empty space, so to speak. So no piece in between, free space. Now you're able to castle your king, which means more security for your king. Or you put your king to safety. More difficult to being attacked for the king if it's castled, in contrast with being in the middle of the board. So you don't want to leave your king exposed to attacks. So castle your king. How do you do it? Always move the king first when you castle, especially if you do over the board tournaments. You always want to get the king first. Move it 2 steps towards the rook. Now that's very exceptional because normally during the game you're going to move the king just one single square, any direction but one. Now when we castle we can actually make an exception, and we'll do it every single time. Move the king, in our case king on e1, 1, 2, over to g1. You're not going to touch every single square, you just put it straight to g1. Then with the same hand, especially if you play physically over the board, get the rook and move it over the king. If you play online, as soon as you move the king 2 squares, the engine will just get your rook automatically over the king. Okay, so that's how it goes. The same for black. Okay, they play imagining knight f6, you're gonna do knight c3. Now black castles the king in the same fashion. Get the king from e8, move it to g8, drop the king off, take the rook, flip it over the king. That's it. Very exceptional move. Now there are some conditions here. In order for you to castle, the prerequisite condition is that you shouldn't have moved the king or the rook before. That's one very important condition. If the king is in check, then you move them and then you put them back where they were. You can't do the castling. So it's important you remember that. And also, if the rook has been moved previously, again, you can't castle with that particular rook. So you could do it over to the other side, the queen side, because, boys and girls, we could also do the castling on the queen side. Let me just move some pieces here. Let me just put them quickly where they were. Okay, I'm gonna just move this bishop out. Imagine we played the bishop. Also, queen needs to be moved. So again, no pieces in between the king and the rook. Get your king 2 squares towards the rook, and the rook will simply move over the king. Okay, so that's how you do it on the queen side, in case you move the rook on the king side. Okay, another exception here. Let me just erase all the pieces here just for clarity. Let me just put a couple of pawns here. I'm going to get a bishop now right here on b4. Okay, randomly put pieces here because I want you to understand some stuff. You can't do the castling now for black because the bishop on b4 attacks along the a3 f8 diagonal, so the king would be to move through check in order to castle, which is impossible, illegal in chess. We can't castle going through check. Impossible. Also, boys and girls, impossible to castle the king if it is in check at that very moment. So now if the rook, as you can see, the white rook now checks the king, and if you want to castle, this is impossible. You can't do it. because the king is in check. So you've got to block the check if you've got something available, any resource available on the board. You need to block the attacking rook, and then hopefully you'll be able to castle. Okay, obviously now, as you could see now, even if you block, castling would be a very bad idea because the rook would take the bishop, but just saying. So you can't castle if the king is in check. Can't go through check if the king has been moved or the rook has been played with. You can't use them for castling. Okay, so I think I mentioned all the conditions here. Right, so free space in between the king and the rook. Don't move the king and the rook you want to castle. Okay, you should do this as soon as possible because the king is safe when they're castled, whereas if the king's in the middle, all the rooks and the bishops will be aiming at, so you don't want to leave the king in the middle. All right, and yeah, don't move them, the king and the rook, and you should be able to castle. Okay, and if you can check your opponent's king or making them move the initial square, so that's a very good stuff because your opponent will not be able to put their king to safety by castling it. Okay, so I think I covered it, right? So yeah, that's what it is. You can castle on the king side, you can castle on the queen side, two squares. A very quick example. Let's say we got a white rook on b2, which attacks along the b column, right? You can do the castle on the queen side now. Why? Because the king is not going through check, right? So the white rook now does indeed attack the b8 square, but your king can go to c8. So just theoretically, you are able to castle on the queen side, okay? As long as your king doesn't go through check or is not in check, okay? That's about the castling, boys and girls. So try to do the castling as soon as possible. Put your king to safety. Okay? Develop your pieces as quickly as you can. All the bishops and the knights need to be developed as quickly as possible. Alright, we'll be discussing this in the opening category of our videos. So that would be for now. Just try to make it to punctuate, to make it, you know, very clearly and very quickly for you to getting the right knowledge. Alright guys, have a super cool evening, and see you very, very shortly with more videos. Thanks very much for watching, boys and girls. See you soon. Bye.